I remember my brother came back from Bosnia and they'd been shelled heavily. And we went to Canada Day up on Parliament Hill. The beautiful fireworks were thumping and crashing in the sky. And I turned and looked back, and he and the three friends who'd just come back with him, they all had their heads down, and every time a shell went off, they'd cringe.
You had to know how bad it was.
My dad died from starvation.
Amsterdam was one big concentration camp.
You run 20 feet up the beach and was killed.
It was like an uphill battle all the time.
We had to go in as fast as we could.
All hell broke loose.
On the surface, life appeared calm for the Dutch people in the days before war. They worked, they enjoyed their families, they socialized, but though life appeared normal on the surface, there were dark clouds on the horizon. People began noticing the unwelcome arrival of overly curious German tourists in their towns, asking unusual questions. Wherever you looked, Germans began appearing, jotting down notes, taking pictures, infiltrating the everyday lives of the Dutch people.
Germans would visit Holland, and they'd even wear their military uniforms, and they'd come in like tourists, and they'd pick up the brochure just like we are as visitors, pick up all the brochure, all the maps, and as they go along, they're taking pictures of your gas pumps on the corner, and where the water was stored, and the hydro was. When they arrived in Holland, they knew where everything was, and they also know who was there.
The Germans, they are foreigners, they are the foreign troops, but we have no recollection of what it's going to be.
In the beginning, you did not have trouble with the Germans. They were not aggressive. They were polite, but they were dangerous.
During the initial stages of the war, Holland declared itself a neutral country, and Germany indicated they would not invade. This promise was short-lived as Germany launched the first paratrooper attack in history. Combining with ground troops, waves of German paratroopers dropped from the skies in and around The Hague, attempting to capture several Dutch airfields and the city itself. The Germans hoped this first major air-land operation in history would surprise the Dutch and lead to a stunning victory. Instead, it was the Germans who were stunned. Though widely outnumbered by the invaders and poorly armed, the determined Dutch soldiers were able to inflict major damage on the Germans. The attackers were forced to retreat without capturing either The Hague or the coveted airfields. The Dutch were able to recapture a strategic bridge near Valkenburg. Later, they attacked the Germans on the ground, and Dutch bombers destroyed grounded German transport planes. In all, more than 500 German planes were lost in the counterattack. Hundreds of German troops were killed or captured. It was a day of great victory for the courageous Dutch fighters. Unfortunately, the victory was short-lived, and within a matter of days, the Dutch had surrendered and the German occupation of Holland had begun.
You're a German troop. You come to Holland for a holiday. Now you come back as occupation. You even know and have met some of the people. You've been in their churches. See how smart they were?
You had to know how bad it was. It was so bad. You see, when the Nazis first occupied Holland, they thought they were going to have a really easy time with us because it weren't the Dutch Aryans also.
Here you are in an established old community, and then an army comes into your town, and the support system, the police, the mayor, the church, everything is in turmoil.
Those guys, they had learned how to march, and they were marching through the street and making propaganda, right, and singing, and like showing off how happy they are, and they're marching through the street and then hoping that other people would join.
Hitler started hitting the cities and wanted to be seen by the population as the so-called savior of Europe. He came through the streets with his entourage. He was standing in an open car, and he was about 7-8 feet away from me, of course saluting the Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. And all around me, I saw Dutch sympathizers going the same way. From that moment on, started hating those people with something fierce.
When the Nazis entered this once prosperous city, the night skies were red with fire.
Just 4 days after the Dutch successfully defended The Hague on May 14, 1940, Germany threatened to bomb the city of Rotterdam if the Dutch did not surrender. Despite their initial reluctance, Holland agreed to capitulate and the German occupation had officially begun. Even with the surrender, Germany proceeded with their threats, destroying Rotterdam and killing hundreds of Dutch soldiers and nearly 1,000 innocent civilians. These were the first victims of a Nazi occupation that would last for 5 terrifying years.
The Germans were very poor navigators. They hit the city instead of the dry docks, and bombs fell all around us. We were forever running to the bomb shelters. As soon as we heard the sirens.
That occupying army then tells you how to think, how to act, what times you can be outside, where you get your food. They take all the men away to dig trenches because they're going to be attacked, and the men are all taken away at threat of life. If you don't go work for that occupying army, you will be shot.
And the German soldiers picked up our priest, our doctor, and taken away to Germany, and most of them is never come back.
The German proper men, you were all in the army, so they needed people to work there, to do whatever they needed.
They had all their soldiers on the front, and they didn't have anybody left at home to work in the factories. So they started taking young men and not so young men out of the countries, transported them to Germany, so-called slave labor.
Every 2 weeks they send people from this village, they send 500 people from that camp to Germany, and only a few come back.
Ik weet nog dat ze ook bij mijn moeder aan de deur kwamen. Zijn hier ook mannen?
They came met her mothers door
yeah.
and asked, are there any men here? You were getting nervous of that.
Yeah.
You either get shot here or you join the SS.
But not all the Germans were bad. We might get something handed, like a piece of chocolate or something, from a German soldier. You don't hear about it because we tend to think that they were all bad. But they're people, and good and bad.
One of the most interesting conversations I ever had was with a German Luftwaffe pilot. The only thing we agreed on what we hated, and the German people hated them as much as we did, was the Gestapo and the SS.
There was no flag at all during the war, because that was forbidden. If you are showing the flag, then you could get killed.
One of the things that the Nazis did was they would pump children. They would ask them questions. They would give them a piece of candy. And how is your mother? And how is your father? Oh, your father's not here. Where is your father then? Oh, he went on a journey. Isn't that interesting? Okay, that's why you didn't talk to anyone, because children could not be trusted to keep their mouths closed.
And don't hear, don't see, don't speak. That's what our kids were treated. So the less they know, the less they can talk.
Kids were reporting their own parents. That's how tragic it was.
The one thing I also remember very well is how still the streets were, because the curfew was 6 o'clock. If you were caught outside after 6 o'clock, you could be either shot or arrested by the Germans.
The papers could not print what they would. They were all under control of the Germans.
They listened to make sure you weren't listening to an illegal radio.
If they got caught by Germans while they were listening to the radio, they were all kept in prison. Everyone who was there at the moment.
The proud Dutch learned quickly about the horrors of German occupation. Families were torn apart, and the life people had known was destroyed. But the Dutch were not to be pacified. In response to the takeover of their neutral, peaceful country, the creation of a powerful Dutch resistance movement began. From its humble beginnings, the Dutch resistance grew into an elaborate network of highly trained counterintelligence fighters. Through sabotage from an underground communication, that led to the hiding of Dutch Jews marked for deportation and certain death. Inevitably, the Germans retaliated with vicious efficiency.
Towns and villages were in flames as the invaders rolled on at a breathless pace, encircling the defenders and slashing their armies, destroying in the name of the new order the homes and shops of those who had dared to resist.
We weren't so easy, and we weren't pushovers. They punished us rather severely.
Resistance. We all call it the resistance. And when it was a member of the resistance and it was good, then you are my friend.
Don't say names, not to your neighbors, not to the children, don't talk.
It was a very underground organization.
Yes.
My father was active in the resistance, and we had quite a large garden, and I found a big pipe, and it was filled with guns. And all of a sudden behind me, my father and the neighbor, and they said, Wimmy, come on, go inside. They really were scared.
They give a sign with airplane to drop food and machinery and pistols.
A lot of bombs were laying on the ground there, and they didn't even detonate. Because all the laborers, they were picked from all over Europe, they sabotaged stuff in the factories. So not all bombs that were thrown down exploded.
Mijn vader en zijn broer, die moest onder de strooi kruipen.
Then there was a razzia, a search from the German, and her father and her uncle had to go under the hay.
Het was een hele angstige tijd voor haar.
It was a frightening time for a child.
My father was in the resistance. The only time I ever played with children was when I played with the children of other known resistance.
Elders do not talk much. And I know there was underground, but you don't tell kids what underground is, because kids might talk, and that's not good. Still, keep your mouth shut. The less they tell you, the less you know.
My father did not know that his brother was in the resistance. So he was very surprised that his brother came in the uniform of the resistance.
It was all a big secret. I don't know exactly what they were doing. You always heard it when it was done.
And the KLM had an understanding that if the Nazis were in their offices, they would do a signal with the window blinds. So when my father approached work and he saw that the blind was down, he turned right around. They got my father to a safe house out in the country where he stayed as a butcher's apprentice.
I got papers from the underground, especially the last 7-8 months from the war, and then I always put them under my clothes and I've never found them.
The strongest place in the house is our washroom. We were 6 of us, mom, dad and the 4 kids, went in that 4x4 washroom and sit there for an hour and a half, waiting for the sirens to go off, that everything was clear. Then you realize what war is all about.
They blew up the railroads and the trains to make it as difficult as possible for the Germans, and they made books illegally during the night, bring the Jews from one home to another home if it wasn't safe anymore. They had to put them during the night at a safe place. That was all in the night.
German citizens are only those of German or related blood, willing to serve the German Reich and people. Marriages between Jews and citizens of German or related blood are prohibited.
As the years of occupation continued, the targeting of Dutch Jews escalated. Most were deported and shipped to concentration camps. Those who remained were persecuted and attacked by the occupying Germans. Of the 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands prior to 1940, only approximately 30,000 survived the war. Those who survived did so largely due to the courageous undying work of the Dutch resistance, who hid and protected thousands of Jews in their homes, saving them from certain death. This was a brutalized, fearful Holland, one living in a fear of their German occupiers, and especially the dreaded Gestapo.
The Gestapo, that was a secret police might, and they were looking around. Where are Jews? Who is hidden Jews? Who is against Germany?
I only know is I've seen the people walk around with a star on the thing, and we know they were Jews. There was not any explanation much given.
The kind of risks that people took, and they took them because they had no option. You either took the risk or you lived like an unfree unperson.
Nou ja, voor één nachtje dan.
One day there came two Germans at the home of my father, and they said they wanted to search the house. My grandmother says, no, you're not coming into the house. My husband is not at home. I'm not going to do that. Says, I have to, otherwise I'm going to shoot you. My grandmother said, then you shoot me, but you're not coming into the house. He went outside to look there, and the good one came into the house and searched. So he saw the attic and saw the table and saw someone had been cutting potatoes. And the only thing he said to my grandmother was, you have to be more careful.
Why I always admire my hosts and my hostess where I was in house. And they would never say, no, it is me too dangerous. Such people can I admire. I was alone, but they had a man, a wife and a child. That were brave men.
It'll take another generation before the Jewish people really forgive the Germans for what they did to persecute them.
Why did you take that terrible risk about hiding that Jewish family in your barn? And they would say, there was no choice. There was no option. We had to do it. And I loved that because that's exactly what informs decency and not.
Life in Holland went from bad to worse as food and fuel supplies dried up and hunger took hold. People went from the city to the countryside scouring for food, walking for days, trading their valuables for any morsel of precious food for their families. Thousands upon thousands of citizens died of starvation during these lean years. Again, the Dutch resistance did all they could to help their people survive.
The resistance made sure the people got food. Otherwise, there was nothing to eat. People from the cities came through Nijkerk, passing through for food.
Bit by bit, things get rationed. Coffee get rationed, sugar get rationed, anything get rationed.
There were 4 in the family, so they got a ration book for 4 people in a family, but they were hiding 5 others. So where were they going to get the food for the 5 others?
I was standing in line for fish. You stand there in line for an hour and a half, just to get 1 kilo of smelt. And that was my job as a kid. You stand in the line there and you come home with smelt.
A disastrous combination of events led to even more starvation during the winter of 1944. Famine, bitterly cold weather, a railway bombing, and failed Allied attempts to provide food all resulted in a nightmare of hunger and deprivation. For those who endured it, that time was grimly named the Hunger Winter.
The hunger year was also the freezing year, and that double whammy of no food and no fuel was the thing that killed so many Dutch.
So we would go to bed very early at night, and I would just chew on a piece of wood to get some taste in my mouth and something in my stomach to try and quell this craving for eating.
You saw people out with buckets and with chisels and hammers, and they were chopping up the asphalt to burn the asphalt.
We didn't have anything in the house to heat the house. So what we did was we took all the doors out of the house, except the front door and the back door, and burned that in the stove. Anything we could find, we burned. My parents had a bag of old shoes, I remember distinctly, and burning old shoes. After a while, the chimney got so plugged up that the smoke wouldn't go up the chimney anymore, so it all came in the house.
My mom had made 2 bags, little bags, a string around my neck, and a bag here on both sides, and my coat over it. And I had to walk to the mill and be careful and watch out all the way that you don't see any Germans or collaborators around. I went through the country, walking like an innocent kid, so-called, you know. Food is food, right? Whatever you make from it. We had to beg for food.
The other thing that no one ever talks about is that you never saw pets. No one talks about that. You never saw pets.
We had nothing to eat. There was no cat and dog on the street. They were all finished. And tulip bulbs. Everybody tried to make tulip bulbs manageable to eat.
There wasn't a living thing on the streets. Anything that moved, mice, rats, any animal got eaten. We ate our dog and our cat. Then we started eating tulip bulbs. We would cook them and cook them and cook them until they became mush. I can still remember the taste of those things, and I wouldn't go near them today. They're awful, awful, awful stuff.
A lot of people wanted to survive. That's a natural human thing. People made deals with the Nazis so that they could feed their families. And yet other family members, they would have hated that, and they would have hated them for it. It must have gone through this ancient community and still be going through it to this day.
The royal family review Canadian paratroops on the eve of invasion. Princess Elizabeth makes her first public appearance since coming of age in an inspection of the invasion spearhead. Time and time again, equipment has been loaded aboard the great carriers. Time and time again, the men have rehearsed their every move for the attack. This time it is the real thing. This time it is the 6th of June, D-Day.
It began shortly after midnight on Tuesday, June 6, 1944, D-Day, a massive invasion that would be a crucial turning point in World War II. The initial phase involved an airborne assault comprising of 24,000 Canadian, British, American, and Free French troops dropped behind enemy lines by parachutes and gliders on D-1. Allied air forces dominated the air over the beachhead, which was crucial to Operation Overlord success. This was coupled with the largest amphibious invasion in world history, 160,000 troops storming a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast. In all, Canada contributed more than 14,000 infantry troops and 7,000 members of the Royal Canadian Navy, with air support from the Royal Canadian Air Force. Their courage, determination, and self-sacrifice were instrumental in the success of the Normandy invasion.
I was told this by the Dutch. As soon as they found out that we had landed in Normandy, they knew that someday they would be saved.
And you've never seen anything like that number of boats around that channel going across the channel. The ocean was pretty rough. A lot of the guys are seasick. Fortunately, I didn't get seasick. I got a little squeamish, but I didn't get seasick. 15,000 Canadians landed on D-Day on Juno Beach. In the North Shore, and the Chaudière, and the Queen Zone with their spearhead at the advance. When we landed, there was a lot of guys been wounded. My brother was hit. So I left my gun in charge of the corporal. I went over to see him. And he was hit in the head and the leg, and I told him to go back to England and stay there. And he says, yes, I'll be back. And he was back.
3 of us from our family over there at the same time. Joe, he was the oldest. He trained 4 or 5 years in England. He was a sergeant. He ran 20 feet up the beach and was killed. When there was somebody killed in the family, the priest always came and let them know. So Mum seen the priest coming in the lane to the house. And she walked out and she said, which one?
I had family members that fought their way from D-Day on to the end of the war. I had an uncle who was killed in Caen. The Canadian military made the furthest advances of all the Allied forces on D-Day.
We had to go in as fast as we could. We didn't know what to expect. Our regiment, when they got an order, they followed it out. And they completed it, no matter what. And we stuck together. We had good men.
By the time D-Day happened, we had just about chased the Germans out of Italy, and they grabbed us and they put us on a board ship and took us to the beaches of Normandy, and we caught up with the rest of the Canadians, and they put all the Canadians together, and we had the job of liberating Holland.
I landed in Normandy, and I stayed with the regiment all the way through France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Siegfried Line, Scheldt Estuary. I lost 3 tanks, so it doesn't say too much for my gunning. The Germans are better gunners than I was.
Following D-Day, Canadian troops were heavily involved in ground battles throughout Holland and other war-torn areas. As German troops retreated, Canadian soldiers found themselves under fire during their attempts to regain towns and cities previously occupied by the Nazis. It became a deadly game of cat and mouse between the advancing Allied troops and the scattered remaining Germans.
And we could look so over the city, and there we saw Phillips. And there we saw the airplanes coming, diving down. And they threw the bombs. The people called it chain bombs. There were a bunch of bombs chained together with a chain, like grapes. Bang! The whole street was completely gone. A lot of people died.
The main thing, though, was the snipers that were left behind. When you're going in street to street fighting, the enemy's gone, then you have to do the search of the homes. We didn't just keep going after the enemy. They're retreated, and we have to then go mostly house to house to search for more that might be around. The sniper's job is to hold you up. And if it wasn't for one fella in my unit, I would have been killed. I would not be here today.
Anytime you come into any city or town or anything, you always look up at the church steeples. That's where they are. The snipers are always up on high ground, and they will pick you off.
A lot of the times things went bad when you're shot out of your tank. You're not infantry, so you really don't know what to do on your feet. So you end up crawling through wheat fields and getting caught in brushes there. You had a right to be scared, I think.
Our first thing when we go into a town or a village, city, whatever it is, we have to go street to street to make sure there's no enemy around. And you had to be very careful when you did this, because the Germans did booby trap an awful lot of places too.
I got so attached to those Jeeps that they were my best friend. Believe me, I lived in that Jeep. I ate in it, I slept in it. Sometimes I slept under it if the shelling was bad. It was my best friend. Every time I lost one, and I lost 3 from shelling, I cried. And remember, we were still boys. And boy, when they smashed my Jeep, boy, I tell you, I was pretty mad, but I cried every time I lost one.
The whole sky was full with condensed lines. The German flag, of course, shooting.
The flak would make you pretty nervous. None of the crew got hit, but our aircraft sure had some holes in it.
The Poles had moved in behind us. We were behind German lines then, and they opened up on with some machine guns. So we get down and crawled, and we could see a tank up ahead that was knocked out during the day, and we got up behind that, and a fellow that was with me, he had more guts than I did. He took off his undershirt and hung it out like that there. And they stopped shooting then.
You can't stop and look after your friends until you've taken the position where the enemy's firing at you. If you stop the forward momentum, you will die.
We went through Holland and kept on up into Germany, but we had been up on the Siegfried Line first. That was an awful battle up there. We were hit with a bazooka across the canal and blew up. The first thing you get hit in the gas tank, and nothing but flame. And I had to back down again because I got jammed with the crew commander. You get out of that and dived out of that, and you're only gone about 5 minutes on that 6-ton turret. You can see it go about 20 feet in the air. I went back, and I had another tank the same day.
Blair falls in a bloody shambles. Emden is outflanked, and the enemy flee in confusion. The last hours of a beaten Germany are made hideous by the guns which have beaten him to his knees.
Any soldier will tell you that the war in Europe for us was Not anything like Italy because of the terrain. They were always up on the mountains and they could always see us coming. It was like an uphill battle all the time.
Very heavy fighting in Arnhem. When we crossed over the bridge, to our left we could see all the gliders with the American pilots in them. They were all dead. The Germans had set them all up as if they're sitting at the controls, and they booby-trapped everything. So they told us, the officers knew what we were going to run into, and they said, don't walk over to any glider, don't try and open the door, touch anything, because it's all booby-trapped.
I said, made sure every man was up before I went back. I never asked a man to do anything I wouldn't do myself. I just didn't care. I had good faith. And I used to tell the Fed, you have faith. He told me he had faith, but he wasn't crazy.
We lived in the ground for 2 years. Never slept in a bed.
Majority of the German people, 40 and above, did not want the war any more than we wanted it. It was the younger generation that wanted to turn the world upside down.
We were up at the front line for 48 hours. They had that place zeroed right in with the mortar bombs. And we got it too. My buddy, he couldn't walk. I grabbed him with my right arm and carried him back to first aid. And all hell broke loose.
Remember sitting in the bomb shelters, hearing the bombs fall around us, all around us, and everything just shook. Now, when I hear thunder, it brings back everything to me. Thunder sounds just like bombs exploding.
Of course, I'll give great praise to the Americans too, because if it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't be here today, I don't think.
Also, we were told not to drink the water in the wells or the creeks because they could be polluted or poisoned. And they give you 2 tablets to put in your canteen, and then you can use any water, and hopefully it prevents a serious problem for you. But yuck, tastes terrible.
The smell of burning buildings, the smell of old buildings where you come into an area where there's been an action. It could be hours, it could be days, it could be weeks. When you come in there, it's a totally different environment that nobody back home ever understands. And you carry that knowledge in your head for the rest of your life.
When we would enter a town, as soon as the people saw it, they'd come running out of their houses, but they didn't realize that there were still bullets flying around and we were still chasing the Germans out of their town. And I'm sure some of them must have got hurt.
One day there was a woman milked a cow, and the battle going on, she milked a cow in the middle of the battle. An old lady. A lot of these stories nobody will believe, but they're true.
With war-crushed Europe facing a winter of starvation, Canada speeds up shipments of essential articles to be distributed through UNRWA. In Toronto, thousands of pounds of canned meat roll from the packing line. Made from a formula designed to utilize meat currently in good supply, its basic ingredient is good red beef. Rotterdam is now open to the first food ships from England. The tremendous task of relieving the plight of the starving Dutch is rushed forward with the arrivals. LCTs are brought into action to help distribute the eagerly sought food. Because of difficulty in clearing river bridges, the original plan of LCTs delivering foodstuffs wholesale has had to be abandoned. Instead, the cargo is carried to harbor sheds from where it is distributed. All facilities are brought into play to unload quickly. In the past, food shipments arrived by air and overland routes. These were found not to be sufficient. Work was rushed to reopen the port of Rotterdam. The majority of foodstuffs now arriving consist of sugar, salt, flour, and tin soups. To thousands of Hollanders, the food ships end privation and herald a return to healthy diet.
Germany at that time knew that there wasn't much hope they were going to win the war. So they made an agreement with the British that if we dropped food at a prescribed height, prescribed point, there would be no interference. And the Germans all honored it. The first trip that we made, we had the guns loaded, but there was no trouble whatsoever. And the third trip, we never even bothered loading the guns.
Case of coffee came close to his stroller where he was sat in. And another friend of us, he lived in a neighborhood too, and he said, yes, the food drops came there, and yeah.
We were told by the doctors and by authorities to start eating very little at first because your system had to get back to accepting food. Unfortunately, some people, when they saw food, they went crazy. They just couldn't hold back, and they started gorging themselves. In the process, dying just a couple of days later from burst stomachs.
Anybody that was on those food drops will never forget them. As long as they live, they'll never forget them.
Prince Bernhard of Holland joins Canadian staff officers at a conference with German commanders on the Holland front. At a schoolhouse in Achterveld, the German staff arrived to arrange details for the Allied movement of food into starving North Holland. A truce is declared as the Germans are brought to and from the meetings by Canadian transport as food lorries converge on the enemy lines. Finally, the signal comes and the convoys move through the enemy lines. 150 lorries driven by Canadian drivers take the precious commodities to hungry Hollanders. At the unloading point, food is quickly unshipped as German provo patrol the area. Thousands of Hollanders have existed on a starvation diet. The cases of Allied food represent the difference between life and death to the war-stricken population. New hope comes to Holland with nourishing food. Gone are the grim days of starvation. Hours of oppression are numbered as victory looms on the horizon.
Following 5 years of oppressive occupation, the liberation of Holland began on September 13, 1944, when American troops entered Maastricht and British troops helped free southern Holland. But it wasn't until the following year that the occupation was truly over. When hostilities ended on May 5, 1945, it was Canadian troops who arrived to liberate Western Holland. After the brutal hunger winter, the arrival of Canadian troops and badly needed food and supplies were a cause for celebration. The appreciation of the Dutch for their Canadian liberators helped forge a deep and long-lasting friendship between the two countries, which is celebrated to this day.
I was only a 3-year-old child, and we were standing there along the road, and the Canadians came in, and even though I was only 3 years old, I can remember exactly the spot. I could show you the spot now where it was, and I still remember.
My father says after 5 years you cannot imagine how glad you are that you see friends, soldiers. He said, I can describe how glad you are after 5 years, not able to speak free, always scared to be shot. He said, I can't explain how grateful we are.
When finally the Allies came into the city to liberate us, I can still remember the tanks rolling in, and in front of the tanks was the pipe band playing away.
I heard something I had never heard before. Music and laughter and dancing on the streets. There was no more curfew.
You feel free, you feel the freedom around you. The feeling was fantastic.
They just were so happy to see you.
We took over Gestapo headquarters, and the kids and people were starving to death, and they had all kinds of food in there. They had a big freezer full of meat. So we opened it up and we told them, come and take what they like. They wanted to burn the place down, to go ahead and do it.
We led the parade out of Apeldoorn, and my Jeep was full of roses up to our waist and girls hanging all over the Jeep. It was an experience of a lifetime.
Cigar for papa, cigarette for mama, chocolate for baby.
And the Dutch girls were fond of the Canadian soldiers.
When young soldiers, 18, 20, 25 years of age, liberate a country, and there are a lot of pretty attractive young women around who are celebrating the liberation, these young boys are keen to meet new friends. As a result of these friendships, many lives were changed for the better. There are organizations in the Netherlands that are interested in reconnecting Canadian families.
My mother saw the Canadian soldiers coming and she was climbing on the tanks, celebrating.
The population went crazy, and of course, you know, singing and flags came out, and orange and red, white and blue.
They'd crawl all over your dish, they'd crawl all over your tank. They want to shake your hand. You had your tank half full of cognac and wine and everything else there half the time.
I'm positive that the Dutch had been making Dutch flags since Germany walked into Holland, because there wasn't a place in Holland that didn't have a Dutch flag flying that day.
I didn't even know we had a flag in the house. So, but they hang out on the stick outside, you know, Liberation.
We had a steady stream of Canadians, and I had a steady stream of chocolate.
I had chocolate bars for the kids and gum and candies and that. I was like the Pied Piper. And if I went back today, they would still remember me.
In April 2008, the Friends of Veterans charity undertook an amazing mission to videotape every living veteran in Canada willing to tell their story through the National Video a Veteran contest. World War II veterans were chosen to return to Holland for the historic 65th anniversary of the Dutch liberation. Funding was arranged through the tireless efforts of Randy Young, the president of Friends of Veterans Canada. Using the power of media exposure, including a feature article from Globe and Mail reporter Christy Blatchford, Mr. Young was able to help raise over $140,000 to help pay for the veterans' travel costs and expenses. Veterans from across Canada, including Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, London, Kitchener, and the Maritimes, were invited to go on the adventure. 11 veterans were chosen for the expedition, but tragically 2 passed away before the trip departed. In total, 9 World War II veterans made the memorable journey back to Holland, along with 2 of the veterans' wives, 2 Afghanistan vets, 3 peacekeepers, and 4 staff helpers. It was an emotional voyage for the veterans, bringing back long-forgotten memories from a lifetime ago and helping them relive the glorious days of Netherlands liberation.
In the center of empire, with hearts beating high with pride and joy, crowds in their millions await the official word that victory has been won in the West. Britons from the Dominions, the colonies, and the homeland, with guests from occupied countries, stand in hushed expectancy, eagerly awaiting the pronouncement of Britain's Prime Minister.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day. Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
Forgotten for the moment are the grim years of sweat, blood, and tears. As in scenes of mad abandon, London celebrates the long-awaited V-Day. The disastrous months of 1940 are far, far away. The horrors of threatened invasion and blitz bombing are mere specters of the past. Shoulder to shoulder, civilians, workmen, housewives, and service people of the far-flung empire have made this day possible. They have the right to celebrate. They wear the mantle of victory. Before Buckingham Palace, excitement reaches fever heat as the moment arrives when the royal family makes an appearance. For a glimpse of their beloved monarch in his hour of triumph, loyal subjects have stood for hour after hour. Now their wishes are fulfilled. Now they celebrate together the great day of triumph.
I've heard the veterans of Holland tell me how they had a sandwich and their water rations, and you're facing hundreds and hundreds of starving civilians, especially the children.
They're eating tulip bulbs, for God's sake. And all us guys, we had stuff to eat, and we all emptied our pockets and give it to the people.
They were living on tulip bulbs and roots, anything they could dig out of the ground.
Seeing the kids today, and the ones I saw when they were starving to death, wasn't a pleasant memory. We fed a lot of these poor kids, but we couldn't feed them all. That's the main part, is looking after kids. That's one reason we're here today, to try to help the kids understand what's going on.
And the kids there, they're always looking for chocolate or something like that there, and if you had any, you'd give them to them, but what there was left of them.
When the Germans left, they just ran and left everything behind. And you could find anything that the German army used during the war. It was fantastic. We would, as kids, we would play on disabled tanks.
We stole ammunition, and what we did, we built a fire, and we screwed those things in there, and we knew that there was going to be a big bang, 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 so we dove in the ditch, and then after a while we hear it bang, 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 you know, the bullets flying all over the place.
There was a flag that my mother made secretly at night. She made a Canadian flag, and she worked on it for about a year, you know, with patches of cloth and what have you, and as soon as the Canadians came to liberate, she hung it out the window.
The women that had gone out with the Germans were brought out to the square. They had their heads shaved off, swastika painted on their heads, and had to stand there all day being abused by the civilians.
I had a very favorite uncle. He was a member of the NSB. They had their eyes and their ears open, and if they suspected resistance activity, so that they would inform the occupiers, and you know, with subsequent results. And until the day he died, this family is by no means unforgiving. That recollection that one of them that had in fact been part of the NSB stayed with them, and hence he pretty well died in isolation.
They're nicknamed collaborators, but little did they know that a good percentage of those women were working for us. They were spying, but their own people tarred and feathered them after the war.
I think the Dutch sorted out who was who. The few that did collaborate, we fixed them after the war. The women, we shaved their heads. The guys got a good beating.
An old Dutch synagogue in Nijkerk, Holland, was partially demolished by the Dutch SS during the years of German occupation. Now the task of cleaning up the holy place is given to imprisoned Dutch quislings who were responsible for its destruction. Under the supervision of Canadian troops, loyal Holland Jews dispense ironic justice as they drive the traitors to cleaning up their temples the hard way. Back in the 17th century, the community of Nijkerk first admitted people of the Jewish faith to live and practice their beliefs as they wished. Relations between Jew and Christian have been friendly since the days of the Reformation. The iron heel of Nazi Germany could not stamp out the ancient religious customs which were observed underground. Now with victory comes freedom of thought and an honored place for free practice of all religious thought.
Every city in Holland has on the 4th of May a silent walk. You start from a certain point in the city and then you walk very silent, very slowly, without speaking. You walk along the monuments which are in your city and then you come to the place where we remember the victims of the war. I think it's amazing that strange people did come to our country to fight for our freedom. I find it fantastic. It's amazing that they came here just to liberate us, and also how many young boys died for us. It's very important that they come to our country and we thank them for what they did for us.
From coast to coast, the Dominion celebrates the long-awaited day of victory in the West. Official ceremonies in New Brunswick's capital start the ball rolling for that province's festivities. They can't find Hitler in Berlin, but in Montreal he makes a personal appearance in grease paint. Many make whoopee in scenes of wild rejoicing. In the nation's capital, a parade of Thanksgiving is held on Parliament Hill. Veterans of two wars mingle as the acting Prime Minister makes an official pronouncement. In the Ontario capital, the focal point for the ceremony is a cenotaph in front of the City Hall. Transportation is at a complete standstill as the Queen City turns out to do honor to the occasion. With drinkables at a premium, one veteran of the Western Front takes no chances. With him, it's cash and carry. Out west, where men are men and flags are plentiful, an armistice is declared in the Little Red Schoolhouse. Proud of their war effort, the people of Manitoba inject that good old Western spirit into their celebration. In every town in the Dominion, the strain of over 5 years of war is relaxed momentarily, as Canucks pay tribute to their sons who have played such a vital part in winning victory in the West.
Friends of Veterans Canada. It was started by a World War II veteran, Harry Watt. He was a dispatch rider. And if it wasn't for Randy here getting together on different things, a lot of us would not be here today.
Bronze Star goes to Sergeant W.J. McGee of Toronto for deeds of outstanding bravery.
William Sam McGee. Sam McGee is a hero of mine, and I guarantee you, in the eyes of thousands of school children that he's spoken to, Sam McGee is the real deal. And he's teaching the purity of goodness and the righteousness of a good cause to the youth of our country.
In the 65 years that have followed the end of World War II, countless tributes have been paid to the sacrifices made by Canadian soldiers who fought valiantly to liberate Europe from the grip of the Nazis and restore freedom to the world. Through parades and Remembrance Day services, the generations who came after the war have gathered to recognize their valiant efforts and celebrate their heroic victories. It was a different time those heroes lived in, one gripped by terror and evil and oppression. To understand their ultimate sacrifice, we need to hear the voices of the few who remain and understand their valuable lessons. If we do not learn from the tragedies of history, we cannot hope to appreciate the freedoms we now take for granted. To those who fought, we owe our lives.
So it's 10 in, right? 1.
I've been honored over the years to have been in countless cemeteries. In every one of them, we're looking for somebody who's fallen, either a friend or a relative.
Get on this side.
His brother. They're all our brothers, every one of them.
To share that moment with a family member who's reunited, literally, with one of their own family. It's an emotional time. It's a great honor to be a part of that.
My brother gave me a little package of clay from near the house, and he said, "Just say to your brother, you'll always be home now."
It's an honor to pay homage to our comrades who didn't make it. And it makes us feel so humble to think that I've lived the most wonderful life that anybody could ever live as far as I'm concerned. And I think of them who never made it past 18 or 19. And it makes you feel very sad for them.
When you go there, it's a real powerful experience just because you read in books about these numbers, but it really doesn't settle in that these are people, because every single man there who's buried there has his name and his age. And the age is probably the most powerful thing, because me, I'm 26 and I was walking through the graves, and most of these men were younger than I was. And here they are, this is their final resting place, and they never got to come home.
I remember all the training, and some of the boys they trained it with are laid over here now. They're never any older than they were then. But here I am, 85 and still around.
You'll see the heartfelt family message, but quite often there's nothing on the stone. And that's a conscious decision by the family. There's just nothing to be said. That the loss is so final that there are no words that can tell the story. There's no words that can explain the loss of that life.
climax to a 3-day Liberation Festival in Amsterdam is the visit from Queen Wilhelmina. General Crerar greets her upon arrival. Thousands of Hollanders jam the streets for a glimpse of their beloved Queen for the first time in 6 years. Taking a big part in the celebration are Canadian troops who parade with Netherlands forces past the Royal Saluting Base. A monster civilian demonstration is the follow-up to the Marshall Parade. Clubs, trades, resistance groups, and religious organizations are all represented. The historic occasion brings with it an indication of the love of a people for their Queen, plus the regard they hold for their Canadian liberators.
In the early years of the war, it was not safe for the royal house to remain in the Netherlands. Princess Juliana and the Princesses Beatrix and Irene, together with a little playmate of Beatrix, that moved to Canada, because Canada was the nearest safe destination from the arm's length in Europe. Princess Juliana was pregnant, obviously. The Canadian government declared the 3 rooms in Ottawa Civic Hospital to be Dutch territory for the duration of the delivery.
I think she's fabulous. She's well liked. And when the service was over, she come down amongst the Canadian veterans with 2, shall we say, security, 2. And they were a good 20 feet from her. No problem.
I've seen entrances coming into towns there, and they'd have wrote right across the street in flowers, "Welcome Canada."
In front of me were tens of thousands of civilians, many of them emotionally brought back to that day from the stories of their ancestors, and certainly many of them who lived through it themselves as children. We're literally following the footsteps of that generation, of those soldiers.
In Appledore, their feeling was real good. They treat me like a king.
And anybody who took place in that parade who is a Canadian, you can feel real proud, feel it deep in your heart for what these men accomplished all those years ago, and it's still appreciated, it's still welcomed, and they are not forgotten, especially those gentlemen who never had a chance to come back home.
You need to learn about history so it doesn't repeat itself, and that's so important for the younger generation to understand that their freedoms and the liberty that they have now was not just automatic, that it was the young people in World War I and World War II who fought and gave up their lives to let them have the kind of life that they get to enjoy today.
I had a few breakdowns in this trip. I broke down a few times. I'm not like that as a rule. I never get excited and I don't get worried about anything. I'm mostly involved this time, too much.
Ensuite, c'est aujourd'hui un autre très beau voyage. Je regarde 3 fois journée. Je pense que c'est mon dernier. À l'âge où nous sommes rendus, le temps des voyages est terminé. Hein? Il reste un voyage.
I just thought it was fantastic. All these children were coming up to the vets, and they were really eager to shake hands with these old gentlemen. That was just fantastic to see, and that was a really powerful feeling to see how appreciated these men are.
They say thank you, Canada. The veterans say thank you, Holland. Yeah, because no one thinks of the veterans like Holland. Even in Canada, I think we get better treated here. Maybe we should stay.
Dutch girl, pretty Dutch girl, come up beside you. She says, "I'm your escort for the parade." I thought, that's not bad.
They are our liberators. Thanks to them, we are here. It is unbelievable. If they would not been there, we wouldn't have been here.
They've got banners on their houses and flags, thanking the Canadians.
Yeah, like we're 16 and we didn't even do anything, but we still get that. But they still respect us. Because our grandparents were the Liberators, we still get that respect, and that's amazing. Coming from Burlington, we thought we would just be helping, so to be involved in the parade has been a really, really amazing experience. Just to see all the people here. It's unbelievable to see the thousands and thousands of people. It must have had people from all over the surrounding villages, people flying in to come and visit and to celebrate the 65th parade.
Those guys standing around us, in their minds, are still 18 years old. They're still the same troopers they were back then. And you hear them when they get together. They haven't changed. Soldiering hasn't changed. One guy said, "What regiment were you with?" He says, "I was with the RCR," and he laughs and says, "I never heard of you." And the guy in front of me says, "Well, how old are you?" And he says, "Well, I'll be 97 next week." He said, "This guy here, he's a young kid, he's only 84. And you get these guys together and they go right back to those days. And you hear stories of, you remember when so-and-so got it? You remember when so-and-so did this brave act? You remember when he went there and we went there? Those stories are still there, and a lot of them are gone. But there's a collective memory. Every regiment has a collective memory.
The Dutch children were all awestruck by the Canadians, especially with their medals. I think I shook hands with every Dutch kid in the world.
The people, they give me the freedom that I can live.
Kids growing up today have to understand is you have to get along. Look for the good in people instead of looking for the bad.
Enjoy your life, because you never know when your life is ending, and you have to enjoy from every single moment in your whole life. You can go to a war and come home normally with all your legs and all your feet and everything, but you can also come back from the war in a box.
La liberté, c'est un grand mot qui veut dire beaucoup. Quand vous êtes capable de vous lever et de dire je puis dire, je sais dire quelque chose, je suis libre de le dire, c'est très bien. Et puis la liberté n'a pas de prix.
In a way, it's fitting that we're seeing this here in Holland. It would be nice to see this much emotion in Canada.
The World War II vets, those are guys who, they really did fight the storybook war. They fought the evil dictator, they beat the evil dictator, and they saved the innocent countries who were oppressed by that guy. You know, so they have those liberation parades, they have those adoring local populaces who throw them those kinds of parades, and 65 years after the fact are still celebrating them. And they earned it. They absolutely earned it. But Afghanistan veterans aren't going to have that.
Those sights and sounds and smells never leave you. And the civilians around you when you come back will never understand it. And you don't want to talk about it because they just won't understand. When a soldier makes a commitment to put on a uniform, it brings them into a world that will never allow them to fit back in comfortably in their own society. And you carry that knowledge in your head for the rest of your life. Great gains to be made by a nation, and great losses to be made by those who have to win. The children want to hear that, and they need to hear that. And they can learn from that how humans can make incredible mistakes, and yet when they band together to conquer great odds and great evil, they can be successful. And that's the lesson that soldiers can teach the youth of our country. If you band together for a righteous cause, you can defeat all odds.
Hi, this is Randy Young. Harry Watts and I started the Friends of Veterans Canada April 1st, 2001. Our mission is to establish a Veterans Video Library of Canadian war stories for future generations of young people in Canada and the world. We do not have an opinion on whether war is right or wrong, we just witness it. Our mission is to be hunter-gatherers of veterans' tales of war, good and bad. I know that every veteran appreciates each and every thank you from all the Netherlands well-wishers. The Friends of Veterans Canada and myself personally would like to thank all the people of the Netherlands for treating my veterans with so much heartfelt love. I will be traveling the highways and byways of our great expanse we call Canada on my Harley-Davidson, gathering veteran stories forever. Our hope is that young people use the Harry Watts Veterans Video Library as a resource of the truth from the veteran's life experience. Lest we forget.